All right, everyone, welcome. I'm going to start a tutorial series on the basic principles and the beginning steps for texturing in Marmoset Toolbag 4. It's a newer release and it's challenging Substance Painter. I'll get into what I think about it at the very end, but in this video, the very beginning video, I'm going to show you how to set up a texture project through baking a high and low poly, and let's get into it. I'm not going to get into too much the UI or anything. This is classic. We have setup like Maya, which is your orthographic views, and we have our texture project where we'll actually be doing the texturing, and it looks a lot like Substance Painter. All right, so if I come into classic, the first thing that I need to do is I need to bake. I need to get my model in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this open. I'm going to grab both my high and my low, and I'm going to drag them in. Okay, now we both have high and low. They're both in here, which is perfect. Okay, let's open up our material. Good. So what I want to do here is I want to create a material. I'm going to call it grenade. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the low poly, and that's what I'm going to apply. Cool. And then the high poly, as you can see, has each of the different objects with a different color, and we're going to use that for a material ID map, baking, and I'll talk about that later. It'll help us masking. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do to get a texture project, because you can't come in here and texture because there is no project, is you need to create a texture project, and through that we need specific maps. And these maps are what is going to allow us to adjust, like a curvature map, an ambient occlusion map, a normal map. That's going to allow us to apply seamless textures on there and adjust different aspects of those textures. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is come up here and we want to click the bread. The bread is going to give us a bake project. Okay, this bake project, we'll go into this real quickly. You can see that in this bake project, we have a bake group, which is a folder that contains a high and a low. And this is how we're going to separate each component in here so we don't have to do an exploded bake. We're going to drop the head versus the head and the high and low. They do not need to have the same naming convention. This folder structure will allow it to bake only with itself, and we won't get any intersections with the cage bake. Okay. Also in here, we have all of our standard selections here. Once we get in here, you can click this and it'll hide the high or hide the low. You have a preview, which is a quick bake that'll run a quick algorithm or quick bake to show you what it will roughly look like so you can make changes. Then we have our output. So I'm going to go ahead and select our output. Let's go Marmoset tutorial. And we are going to use texture maps, mesh maps, and we're going to call that grenade underscore. All right, cool. Actually, let me see what I got here. I don't want that. I want that to be a PNG. Okay, so we're going to call that grenade. I've already baked them out, but we're going to do it again. Save. Okay, what we want, samples. How many times do you want it to iterate on the bake passes? We'll go with 64. All right, 8 bits a channel, that's fine. Padding, good. Multiple texture sets, no. We want only one. The way that I UV'd this object is I UV'd it as part of a whole set, so it's not taking up the whole UV space, which is not good, but it's just for a quick tutorial, and I'll go into that a little bit later. Down here, you have texture project link. Now, to texture, you're going to need those maps, and you can import them, but here we want to create a texture project, and you can do that in the texture window. You can add a texture project over here in the layers, or you can come up top, but nice and easy right here. Texture project, click new project. It's going to come down. You see it creates a little easel, a little paint easel with grenade underscore. Okay. Now we'll get into that in a second. Next, we need to select which maps we want to use. So I'm going to hit configure. From here, we need to select all of the base maps, and those are going to be the same as in Substance Painter. So normal. You can choose height if you want. Position, curvature is necessary. Height, maybe not. Cavity if you want. Cavity or convexity. I use them in faces, or if something needs to have a little bit more a map, so I can do pores. Thickness is necessary, bent, nope, ambient occlusion, and material ID, okay, which is necessary. Now that I've selected all of them, all it did was activate them in our maps. So I need to come down here and select each map and say that I want to bake those out. Okay, cool. Now that we're here, what we can do is we can click into our texture project in our scene. And down here you can see everything, our project resolution, UV padding. You can see we have curvature normal, material AO, which is perfect. This is what we want. Let's see, I might need a thickness map. Do they need it in there, or is it automatically gonna put it in? Thickness, okay, cool. Nope, it'll automatically bake it in. Down here we get to select our workflow, specular or metalness. I'm gonna choose metalness. Down here you can see all the stuff we had. It's kind of remembered from past projects, so I'm gonna remove scatter and displacement. We need the color, ambient, the height or bump map, metal, normal, and roughness. That's all good. And then down here, this is for exporting textures. I'll cover this later, and you can choose how you want to export these textures if you want to bring into Unreal or Unity or Maya or 3ds Max, and I'll show you how this works in a later video. Okay, but let's go back to our bake project. And now what we need to do is we need to go through and basically drop these in. So I'm going to take this base on the low and drop it into low, base on the high, drop it in the high. Okay, you don't want to put all of them in each of these because then the bake will intersect with itself and it'll cause issues. So what I'm going to do is come up to bake project. This folder right here, you can hover, says creates a new bake group. Boom, right up on top, which is good. So cotter pin pull low, cotter pin pull high, bake project, let's add another one, cotter pin low, cotter pin high, bake project, add a new one, head release low, head release high, bake project, we'll add another one, head pin low, head pin high, and we will add one more, which is the head low and head high. Okay, so as you can see, everything disappeared, and by default, the bake groups automatically hide the high poly. So you can do a preview bake. If I wanted to, I could hit high poly, it'll come back. You can hit low and it'll hide, okay? So we're good. I've already applied grenade to everything, and I've already dropped each of the corresponding meshes into a bake group, which means it will not intersect. So this won't project onto the head. Okay, I'm gonna close that up. Come to grenade. The thing I wanna do is here is I need to link a material. So I'm gonna come here and grab grenade. I'm gonna come and drag it in. So now I've added the material that all this stuff is going to bake into, okay? Come back to your bake project. Now that we're here, if you wanted to, just a quick overview of the baking. It uses cage baking. So something that we can do is if I open this up, let's scroll down to the base because it's easy to see. If you click the folder of the low, you'll see that a transparent grid comes on the outside, and that's the cage. And what you can do here is if it's not covering, and it's not necessary in this object, but in a more complex object, you can actually increase how far out the cage is. So it'll bake from the vertex position on the low poly outward, capturing everything within that cage as you push it out. So if you visualize the low and the high poly and there's some parts that are too far out, you can select it. You can also paint the offset in here, which will allow you to basically just choose a black or white value and paint onto this or on here. And then if it's white, the cage will expand out. If it's black, the cage will collapse towards the low poly mesh, and that'll allow you to do a much more complex bake. For now, it's not necessary for this object. Okay, so we're gonna come up here, click this, bake group, and we are going to hit bake. And as this is gonna think, it'll be pretty quickly, it bakes pretty quickly, it uses GPU. It'll tell you how it's going as it's updating each of these maps. And there we go. Okay, so now we have it. You can see we have the ambient occlusion. Everything's kind of baked in. If I were to come over here and click the grenade material in the materials tab, you can see it has all the maps. I'm going to deselect the displacement, normal, albedo. You can see the transmission. We don't want any of this right now. So I'm going to click none. So I don't need subsurface scattering. It did it from my prior project. So you want a diffusion, Lambertian, no need for transmission over here. Where Lambertian used to be a subsurface scatter in old Marmo, they pushed under transmission in this one. And you can see everything else plugged in. If we were to go over to our scene view and click our texture project, you can see all of these maps, curvature, normal, normal object, material ID, AO, thickness, and height, have all been implemented into here and put into the material, so everything that's necessary. We scroll down to our project maps. You can see all of these project maps are what we can edit. So I don't need a scatter. I don't need a displacement. We need a roughness, normal, metal, bump, ambient occlusion, and albedo. That's what we're going to be using to edit. So now what I can do is I can come up to the top and hit texture, and you can see now that I have the ability to have everything set up. I have a texture project, and within this texture project, I can now add a paint layer with all of my project maps able to choose and select. Okay, so now we are ready to start texturing. So that'll wrap it up for setting up Marmoset and setting up high and low poly, setting up bake groups, baking everything down, and creating a texture project and having those baked maps transition into that texture project so you can utilize them, so you can utilize some of the procedural workflows. Alrighty, until next time, thank you so much for stopping by.